2020, and I'd like to call to order the Monday, August 24th Maplewood City Council meeting. I want to start out tonight's meeting with some exciting news about a new partnership that we are going to be having with Ramsey County. But first, before I tell you what the partnership is going to look like, I want to give you a little background. In 2019, the Maplewood Department of Public Safety launched a really innovative initiative called the Mental Health Outreach Team, or MHOT. And the goal of MHOT was to help people suffering from mental illness. This is a joint venture between our police and fire departments, and where we have specially trained police officers and community paramedics who work together to conduct outreach to people suffering from mental illness who might not have services or support. And currently, the team is comprised of 3 fire department staff and 5 police staff members. The goal of MHOT is to connect people in need with definitive services and really to decriminalize mental health issues. The team works and advocates for patients and tries to establish care programs for them. And, you know, I was really quite amazed that 16% of Maplewood Public Safety Department's overall call volume is attributed to mental health issues. Of all the 911 police calls, 547 calls were either people in crisis or were suicidal. In addition to that, police officers in our city responded to 698 calls where the primary reason for the call was directly related to mental health. Fire and emergency medical service units were dispatched to 456 mental health related calls. Plus, they responded to an additional 382 calls where the provider primary impression was a psychiatric or behavioral emergency. And so our public safety department recognized a need in our community and have been trying very hard to meet that need. I have spoken and worked with Chief Mondor and Sergeant Duga in talking with them about MHOT and what we can do to make this even better. And I approached the Ramsey County and together with Chief Mondor and Sergeant Duga, we had a meeting last week with Ramsey County. Of course, it was a virtual meeting, but it was a very productive meeting. And as a result, Ramsey County has agreed that they are going to embed a social worker in the Maplewood Police Department, which is really a fantastic opportunity for our community and for those who are struggling with mental health issues. And I think that this really generated from our public safety folks recognizing that there's a need. And now we've moved full circle to the point where starting January 1st, 2021, we're going to have a social worker that is going to be working hand in hand with our police and fire officers out there, recognizing and then helping residents and people in our community get the mental health help that they really are in need of. And so I want to thank Chief Mondor and Sergeant Duga for all their help on this initiative. And I'm pretty excited to see how this is all going to work out. And I really think it's going to be a great benefit to our community to have a social worker working with our public safety officers. It's an exciting partnership. And I think it speaks very well on some of the partnerships that we can form with our county that ultimately will benefit Maplewood residents. So I'm excited about that. And I'm sure we'll get a report after the first of the year. We'll be hearing more about it as we get towards the first of the year about what the program is actually going to look like. But they will be working out of the Maplewood Police and Fire Department. So it's a pretty exciting thing. I'm really thrilled about it. So with that, that's the good news for tonight. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. City Clerk Sint, would you do our roll call for us, please?
Councilmember Juniman,
Here.
Councilmember Knutson,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Mayor Abrams,
I'm here.
and Councilmember Nevlet will not be joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Council members, the order for tonight, we've already had 2 previous meetings, but the order tonight, just a reminder, will be Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Knutson, and then Councilmember Juniman. We were provided with an amended agenda. I hope you all were able to take a look at that. And so in looking for an approval of the agenda, we're actually looking at the amended agenda. There was an item under the consent agenda, the 2020 CARES Act election grant between the county and the city, an agreement regarding that. And so with that, I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
I move approval of the agenda as amended.
Second.
Moved by Juniman, seconded by Knutson. Approval of the agenda as amended. Any further discussion? Hearing none, then let's go to a vote. Councilmember Smith?
Aye.
Councilmember Knutson?
Aye.
Councilmember Juniman?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Let's move on to the approval of the minutes. First, we have the August 10th, 2020 City Council meeting minutes.
I move approval of the meetings minutes.
Thank you. Moved by Councilmember Juniman, approval of the Monday, August 10th, 2020 City Council minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Smith. Is there any discussion?
Mayor, I have a couple of small corrections.
All right.
Under the call to order, the last sentence, there are a number of resources available for residents, which should be TS, not CE, and businesses should be plural.
Thank you very much. I noticed that as well. Anything else? I would only add to that we made it clear that those would be available on our website, just for clarifications. Anything else? Okay, then let's move to a vote. Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Knutson.
Aye.
Councilmember Juniman.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Okay, moving on to our August 14th, 2020 City Council special meeting minutes.
I move approval.
Second.
Moved by Juniman, seconded by Smith. The minutes for the August 14th, 2020 City Council special meeting minutes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, then let's take a vote. Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Knutson.
Aye.
Councilmember Juniman. Councilmember Juniman.
Aye. Sorry.
And I vote aye as well. The August 14th special meeting minutes are approved. Moving on to appointments and presentations. Administrative presentations. Ms. Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. The council calendar is a snapshot of what's coming up at our next 2 meetings. The first thing is next on September 14th, we are going to have an EDA meeting to address the Maple Ridge Shopping Center TIF application. And we're also going to be doing commission interviews. We do have some, I think there's 5 openings on 3 of our commissions. Also, we will be adopting the 2021 preliminary tax levy. And then at the council meeting, actually approving the Maple Ridge Redevelopment District TIF agreement. Also, I failed to put this on the calendar, but we do need to have a closed session probably at the end of the meeting, maybe before. I'll have to look at what the business of that evening looks like. To discuss the myth, we will be going to mediation with them on September 21st. And our league appointed attorney, Paul Reavers, wants to give us an update on where we're at with that. So I will be adding that on, and I'll let you know more about it as we get closer to the meeting. In addition to that, on the September 28th meeting, we're going to do commission interviews because we have quite a few. So we thought we would break that up into 2 meetings. Another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, and I put it in the FYI, has to do with charitable gambling. As you know, over the last 4 or 5 years, the amount of money collected through charitable gambling has been going down. And this year we have a balance of about only $15,000. So as I indicated in the FYI, I think we may want to consider a discussion at a council meeting to talk about whether or not it makes sense to send out letters to the 20 or so people that have gotten proceeds from charitable gambling in the past, or should we have a discussion at the council about how you would see the best way to spend that $15,000. So if it's okay, Mayor and Council, I'd like to put that on the council meeting next on the 14th to get some input from you on that, so that if you do want to go ahead and have everybody ask again, we'd need to get those letters out. We do have to spend the money by the end of the year. We would typically put something in Maplewood Living, but we're not sure that that's such a good idea either if we really don't have much money to go around. So if that's okay, I will do that. If you have some other ideas, I'm happy to have that discussion now if you want, whatever is your preference.
I guess I'd like to toss that around a little bit because this is a very different year. I've sat in, as has Councilmember Juniman and Councilmember Smith, many times in distributing the charitable gambling money. And as I recall, we have helped so many different groups, many of them related to the schools. And given the fact that, schools are, many of them are operating virtually, the kind of group activities that we have funded in the past are not happening right now. I'd like to throw out some ideas and have council members think about this, that this might be the year. In the past we've had, I remember, we were distributing over $30,000. And, this is considerably less money. And, one of the things is very near and dear to my heart is the fact that our Maplewood Community Center /Y continues to distribute food for those who are food insecure. That maybe we look at this year being a very unique year, since many of these programs are not going to be operating as usual. I believe that we still have a very serious need, and we have residents that are food insecure, and the Y is doing a wonderful job of meeting some of those immediate needs. So I think that there are some other things, maybe other council members have other ideas, but I certainly am open to talking about how best we could use that money in our community to help those who are in the most need. Council member, let's run around the council and see what other people have to say. Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, I agree. I think that maybe concentrating those funds in a single place to allow them to maybe do a little more work is not a bad idea. I think it might be good for us to figure out sort of a good I think certainly the food support is a great cause, but it's probably worthwhile just to have some, maybe not huge process, but something that we go through to make sure we're considering all options. But I think directionally I'm on board.
Okay, Councilmember Knudsen.
Thank you, Mayor.
I think, during these times, you're kind of looking at basic needs, and certainly the food is a basic need. Also, my first thought when you started this item was to think about the schools and education. So I think, narrowing makes a lot of sense as far as the contribution and all that. And I'd be open to any kind of discussion that we might have.
Okay, Councilmember Juniman. Councilmember Juniman.
There's also the Meals on Wheels, and I think we should target. And there's Meals on Wheels for seniors. There's the senior check-in program that the Y was doing. If you look down the road, our police department in the past several years has been doing a special outreach at holiday time. So there's those kinds of things that we could be talking about.
Okay. I think that gives you some ideas, Ms. Coleman.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I will bring back a staff report at our next meeting so that you can have a little more detailed information and make a informed decision. I think one of the things we'll have to do is also publicize to the past recipients, should we choose to narrow that, that there just isn't much money, and kind of let everybody know why you're making the decision that you're doing moving forward.
Okay. In terms of adding to the this part of our agenda, one thing I wanted to bring up too is the possibility of, in the future, returning to in-person council meetings. And I guess what I'd like to do is ask staff if they could take a look at what our options are, what the process would be. What I do know that some of the other cities have returned to in-person meetings. And I guess I'd like to have a discussion about that. And I think it would help to have a staff report to base that discussion on, to find out by then, what are the governor's restrictions? What does that look like? What would be the process? Mr. Beatty would have to weigh in on that in terms of the process of returning. And what if there are council members who would continue to, because that is a possibility as well, to, participate virtually. But I think I'd like to start that discussion back up and start with the staff report. Council members, is there anything else that you would like to add to the council calendar update? Councilmember Smith.
No, thank you.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Oh, thank you.
Councilmember Juniman.
No, thank you.
Okay. Then we don't have any council presentations for tonight. Moving on to the resolution for appointments to the Nature Center Task Force and Parks and Recreation Programming Task Force. City Manager Coleman, do you want to tee this up for us? I think you and Mr. Sable are going to be presenting. Yes. City Manager Coleman, are you there?
Goodness, I'm sorry. Well, that was a lot of talking for nothing. Sorry about that. I think I'll start over. Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. We discussed the creation of 2 task forces at our July 13th meeting. And this was in reaction to looking forward to how the Nature Center could be used and our Park and Rec programming in a manner that would address the needs of our community, be it environmental learning or sports programming, whatever that might be, that could be sustainable moving into the future without having to have the whole freight of that cost being paid by the residents of Maplewood, when we found out that 2/3 of the users are actually folks that don't live in Maplewood. So that was sort of the purpose. We went through a process by which we notified people who had been communicating with us over their concerns about the closing of the Nature Center and other partners in the Park and Rec programming. This evening you got those applications and you've ranked those. And I'd like to have Mr. Sable kind of go through that and also talk to you a little bit about how we see those task force meetings shaping up. What will the content be? And one of the things that we think is really important, and Mike can talk about this in more detail, is to do a community survey that would hopefully be completed by mid-October, so that once we surveyed the community on those particular items, but some of the other questions that we asked 3 years ago, that then we could have an open house or community engagement process where people who weren't on the task force, other residents or concerned partners would be able to come and provide input to you as well. So we have a pretty good scope of work lined up for you, and also your job this evening is to actually appoint members to those two task forces. So with that, Mayor, I'd be pleased to have Mr. Sable give the rest of the report.
Great, thank you. Mr. Sable?
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Mike Sable, Assistant City Manager, HR Director. As City Manager Coleman indicated, we have been working on this since the the mid part of June, and over the past month, we have been recruiting residents and identifying key stakeholders and partners within the region who have an interest in both recreation and park programming and in the nature center. So sometimes that might be school districts or the county partnerships or some nonprofit partners that have an interest. We've also reached out to the University of Minnesota, who was a strong partner, and the other part that's related to specific to the nature center folks. For the recreation and parks program, we've done outreach to schools, to the county, and to some of the athletic associations who are users of our services. And so you have, as a city council, have scored the applicants for those open spots for both the Nature Center Task Force and the Park and Rec Programming Task Force. And one of the things that I think we have been working on at a staff level is what are some of the areas and some of the topical areas that we have identified that folks will have to talk through. And as you'll remember, and when we talked about it in our July meeting, we identified that we anticipated about 6 meetings. We thought that would give folks enough time to really understand the challenges and the issues, but also then we could help identify if we needed to get speakers from the outside or groups that could provide additional information for our groups. And so at a really high level, we think there are probably 6 or 7 content areas that each task force will have to wrestle with. The first one is really budget fundamentals. What does it cost to operate the Nature Center? What does it cost to operate rec programming? What are some of the revenue streams? What are some of the fee structures? Really just understanding the budget. The other one is really a kind of a current state of affairs. How many people use it? Where are they from? Part of that current state is also who are our competitors. We don't often think of cities as competitors, but if there are 5 or 6 nature centers within a region, what do they offer that Maplewood could maybe offer something different or something that is unique or a certain niche? And the same thing would apply to rec programming. There are certain communities that attract softball more than soccer, for example. And so we have to really understand who are our competitors and where might our residents continue to get services, even if it's not provided directly. Part of that conversation then is also an understanding of our demographics. As the makeup of the community changes, the needs of the residents shift over time. And so I had a very short conversation today with Public Safety Director Nadeau, but he reminded me that the Multicultural Advisory Commission could provide an excellent sort of base for what does our resident of tomorrow or someone who comes from a underrepresented community look for in services. And so there's possibly an opportunity to build on some of the strengths that each of the groups do and they have. And so I think there's a chance for maybe some collaboration internally and with the community. I think another content area that's really important is identifying potential partners. And we've talked very broadly about, how do we continue to offer great services with declining general fund property tax support? And I think that's the theme. And so the identification of partners. And I think those sort of 4 broad categories provide a really good basis for the task forces to then frame up these options that exist that might emerge. You don't know what good ideas are going to come until you get people in a room or on a Zoom meeting talking and collaborating and thinking and knowing what's out there. But at some level, what we would like by the middle of December is to have these identified. What are these services that we would want to provide that don't require general fund property tax subsidy? How do we make it a sustainable funding model that provides that service? And I think the last piece that City Manager Coleman mentioned was this opportunity for a survey of the broader community. So this is, the task forces are designed to be small, intensive groups that work on this. But what is the perspective and the perception and the attitude of all of the residents? And I think we have an opportunity to do a community survey. Number one, it was part of our strategic plan for identifying community inclusiveness. And so this was a tool we'd always anticipated. And I think in this global pandemic and response to COVID-19, there's an opportunity for us to ask a few other more direct questions that I think can give some insight and to actually help our task forces really think through what is needed to be thought through, and I think come up with a really good recommendation for the council to consider at the beginning of 2021. So I realize that was a lot, so I apologize, but I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. That was, I think, a really nice outline on what this looks like going forward. Let's start with our council members in terms of questions, either for City Manager Coleman or for Assistant City Manager Mike Sable. Councilmember Smith.
I think that as we go through this process, it's going to be really important that we lay out, to put this in terms the mayor will appreciate, that we lay out really good jury instructions for this process. that we have a very clear idea of what's in scope to be considered, what's not, and what is the mission of the group. And Mr. Sable, I think you laid it out really well there, but I think we're going to have to continue to reinforce and be very consistent with that process. Very much looking forward to getting this group together and hearing what they have to say.
Thank you very much. Those very good comments there. Councilmember Knudsen.
I agree with Councilmember Smith. I think we need to have kind of, the scope of what the decisions, what the recommendations would be. Again, reminds me of that EMS task force I was on. It was very critical, very important. Yet we knew all the time, when it was input, when it was decision making. So I think that's going to be critical going forward.
Okay, Councilmember Juniman.
Agree. I think we have to be really clear from the beginning. I mean, they all know why they applied. So obviously we don't spend a lot of time on that. Sometimes committees spend way too much time on how we got here instead of where are we going. So I think we need to have our goals pretty solidly actually written down so that people can constantly remind themselves of where they're headed and why they're doing this. Because otherwise it can go on for a longer time than is needed and it might not get us to the goal. And this goal is important. We're wanting to reestablish the Nature Center, we're wanting to reestablish our Parks and Rec program and make them sustainable for a long time into the future. So we need to be very clear on what we expect these people to come back with by way of ideas and suggestions for this. That's the first thing.
Excellent. Thank you for that as well. Council members, I think we also need to have a little discussion in terms of, looking at the Nature Center Task Force score sheet. In any task force, trying to find a magic number that is a workable number that is representative of the stakeholders and the residents and concerned parties so that we get the people to the table. Looking at this in terms of paring it down, I would suggest that we, just looking back, at the size of the task force, we're already going to have, some staff members on there, but I would propose in terms of the Nature Center task force that our motion for approval would be all of those who averaged a score of 7.8 or greater, which would be 11 of those who applied.
I agree, Mayor.
Okay, Councilman Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think that's a good approach. I think, it's good to have a little bit larger number for these sorts of things to ensure you can have quorum, because people do get busy. So, I think having a little bit larger group and a more inclusive approaches are both really positive.
City Manager Coleman or Assistant City Manager Sable, can you comment too? There was going to be one representative from Parks and Rec on this as well, and also someone from Ramsey County. Is that correct?
No.
I see Assistant City Manager Sable, you unmuted yourself. Do you want to reply to that?
Mayor and council members, I'm happy to. When City Manager Coleman wants to unmute, she can respond. But the Environmental and Natural Resources Commission did make an appointment to the Nature Center Task Force. You'll have to excuse me. I don't know the name of the individual off the top of my head, and I don't have it in front of me. And I also know that the Recreation and Parks, the Rec and Park Committee did appoint an individual to serve as a representative there on the Parks program, the Recreation and Parks Task Force.
Okay.
We did also make outreach to Ramsey County regarding the Nature Center Task Force, and they've identified 2 individuals to serve on that. We did make outreach to the school districts because they are obviously a huge resource and a huge user of both. Unfortunately, they're just, from a staff capacity standpoint, they're busy working on the safe return to school, and so they're not able to provide staff resources to support us. I think they'll be engaged and interested in the process, but they have, I think, more pressing concerns from their standpoint about getting kids to school safely. So, City Manager Coleman, you can catch up what I missed.
Mayor and Council, I could add that on the Natural Resource Commission, Ms. Okeson was appointed to be the liaison, and on the Park and Rec Commission, Dorothy Malstead was appointed to be the representative to the Park and Rec Task Force.
Okay. And then we also have council members, one who is assigned to each one of these as well. And so I think that gives us a really representative sample if we've got, if we just focus on the Nature Center Task Force, if we have the ENR, one person from Ramsey County, we have the 11 that I'm suggesting going down to 7.8. And then we have Ms. Robbins, Mr. Sable, and Ms. Coleman, I believe, on the Nature Center Task Force, which seems to me to be a very representative number. And I think that's what we're really aiming for. Council members, do you want to weigh in? Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, I think that's a wise approach.
Okay. Councilmember Knudsen?
I'd agree with the approach.
Councilmember Juniman?
I agree.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Smith?
thank you, Mayor. Friendly amendment. If we do talk to folks and people are unable to serve or no longer wish to serve, would we just keep going down the list?
I'm fine with that.
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Knudsen?
Yes.
Okay. So we need to have it seems to me to make sense to do this as 2 separate task forces and 2 separate motions. City Manager Coleman, do you think that's the best way to approach it?
Yes, Mayor, I think that's a really good way to complete that.
Okay. So do I have a motion?
I move that we appoint the top 11 candidates on the Nature Center Task Force score sheet. And then the aforementioned Ramsey County ENR and staff people. And then, of course, I'm the council liaison, but I don't know that I count.
Of course you do. Okay, moved by Juniman, seconded by
Second.
Smith, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, then let's vote. Councilmember Smith,
Aye.
Councilmember Knutson,
Aye.
Councilmember Juniman,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Moving
And
on.
obviously, it's built in that we would, if someone is now refusing, as Councilmember Smith said, we would just go to the next person.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, then let's move on to the Parks and Rec Programming Task Force score sheet. Councilmember Smith, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Have we decided on a number here? Or?
No, we're kind of looking at, I mean, I can start it off. I would propose that we go down to 8.6 so that we would have 5 members on the Parks and Rec Programming Task Force. And then, of course, we will have someone, Ms. Molstead from Parks and Rec, we'll have someone from the county, and then we'll have 3 staff members on there. I don't know that this one necessarily needs to be as large.
That seems reasonable. Yeah, I think that's, and then same story. We just continue down the list as people may or may not be continue to be available.
Okay, Councilmember Knutson,
I'd agree.
Councilmember Juniman.
I agree.
Okay, is there a motion then in that regard?
I move that we appoint the top 5 score sheet members from the Park and Rec Programming Task Force, and of course, continue on if we need to fill in. And the Parks and Rec Commission and the staff.
Okay.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Juniman, seconded by Councilmember Knutson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Councilmember Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilmember Knutson,
Aye.
Councilmember Juniman,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. I am excited for our 2 task forces to get started and to start really diving into these 2 issues. I think that I'm really looking forward to their reports. So with that, moving on to the consent agenda, we have now 4 items on our consent agenda. And what I thought I would do, well, I guess we need a motion and then, okay. I digress for a moment. Is there a motion concerning the consent agenda?
I move the consent agenda items G1 through 4.
Second.
Any further discussion? And what I wanted to do there is I wanted to have, since item number 4 on our consent agenda was added late this afternoon, I would ask Ms. Sint if she could just basically give us a couple of sentences on the 2020 CARES Act election grant from the county. Ms. Sint, are you on? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm sorry, I thought you were calling for a motion.
Oh, no. Can you give us a couple of sentences about what this is, because it was added late this afternoon?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mayor and Council. So Friday evening, I received this from Ramsey County asking that the city join in agreement with them for the CARES Act election grant that they have received through the Secretary of State's office for 2020 elections. And it needs to be back to them by September 8th, which is why we had to add it on to this meeting, as our next meeting is after that deadline. And there are, the state did come up with allocations, which are part of the attachment there. Every city and or township had allocations that they were defaulted with a beautiful calculation of voter and precinct and absentee, and it took a lot into account, and we defaulted to just over $20,000. And in order for us to receive that money from Ramsey County, we do need to enter in this agreement, and this is only for the primary, the August primary and the November general election, and only for provisions to administer those elections during a pandemic. And one of the things that we are looking to do to match what Ramsey County is doing is to increase the pay for our election judges, just because they do put in a lot of time and it is a stressful event for them. So that is one of the main reasons that we are looking forward to being able to have this, so that we can show our appreciation to our election judges. And if you have any other questions, I will certainly try my best.
Thank you very much. You did a really nice job kind of outlining that and why it came onto our agenda so late. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion or any questions for Ms. Sint? Councilmember Smith.
No questions.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Just a comment. I read it. It's very straightforward and really a good opportunity. Yeah. So.
Councilmember Juniman.
I agree with Councilmember Knudsen, and I think our judges are really earning their pay this year.
Yes,
question.
Okay, council members, let's vote on the consent agenda. Councilmember Smith.
Aye.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Aye.
Councilmember Juniman.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. We have no public hearings, no unfinished business. We do have an item of new business, a vacant building registration. I believe that this is yours, Mr. Thompson.
It is. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Mayor and Council, earlier this year, on a brief discussion at one of the council meetings, the council had asked staff to put some time in to study vacant property registrations. It is a tool that some cities in the Twin Cities metropolitan area use to address ultimately the maintenance of vacant properties within their city. So we just wanted to come to the council, provide an update to you on the research and background information that we've gathered, talk a little bit about some options that staff has put forward, and then seek any direction and feedback from the council. We're not requesting any formal action or approval for the council this evening. So first, I just want to walk through and very briefly just highlight the survey that we did of other cities. So we looked at pretty much all of the metropolitan Twin Cities cities in the area, and then also connected with a trade group in the code enforcement industry about what other cities are doing. The full results were included in your packet, but I think the first finding is first, Minneapolis and St. Paul, both the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul have robust vacant building registrations and have had them for quite some time, likely due to just a significant number of total properties that they have in their community, but also just the significant numbers of vacant properties that they've had. If you look at more comparable communities to Maplewood in suburban cities, we were able to identify 4 cities or 3 cities in a township: Richfield, Champlin, Brooklyn Center, and White Bear Township, that currently administer and require some form of a vacant building registration. They're a little different, they're a little nuanced between the individual ones, but generally they trigger and require that an owner register a vacant property after it's been vacant for an extended period of time. It's usually around 6 months. The filing's fairly straightforward. It does require information on who the owner is, but more importantly, it does require filing of contact information on should the city need to contact an owner or the owner's representation who that contact should be. That's the simplest requirements. Some cities go beyond that and do require some level of maintenance plan be submitted so that that they are proactively ensuring that the property is maintained. Interesting, in our research, we primarily found that the suburban community registrations were established during the foreclosure crisis between roughly 2009 and 2013, 2014. And that was because during this period, these communities saw a huge or significant increase in the number of foreclosures of residential properties, which was leaving a lot of bank-owned properties and banks that were not accustomed to owning properties and having to maintain them for an extended period of time. And then just the general difficulty of for cities to being able to identify the correct person at a bank. If it's the main branch of a national bank in New York City, it can be difficult to know who the local person is to contact for maintenance. So that's primarily when the suburban registrations were established to address that foreclosure crisis. Secondly, we just wanted to provide some information on vacant properties here in Maplewood. And I know as part of our discussion last fall with the EDA and the HEDC, we did send out a list. But I would say our code enforcement staff maintains an informal list of vacant properties that we are aware of. On average, there are usually, it varies, of course, as properties become vacant and reoccupied, but on average, there are usually around 40 residential properties that are vacant at any one time. And our information on this primarily comes from, it comes from a variety of sources on how we learn about vacant properties. One is utility information. So St. Paul Regional Water will notify the city when water has been shut off to a property, which indicates vacancy. But actually, our primary way we probably learn about it is through our trash contract with Republic. Because they're required to provide trash service, if a property becomes vacant, we are able to connect with Republic, who has some information about that. And because they are a contractor for us, they share that information quite readily, that we're able to use that to identify vacant residential properties. On the commercial side, there are usually fewer than 10, I would say probably even less than that, because really the vacant property registrations only apply to fully vacant commercial property. So if there's a vacant tenant space or vacancy within a building, it wouldn't apply there. It's only for a fully vacant commercial property. So there are only a small handful. So, how do we use this list that we maintain? I think a couple ways. First, we use a list to monitor these properties, understanding that they're not occupied. So we do regularly visit them just to make sure that there aren't any property code issues, that the properties are being maintained, that there aren't any other code enforcement concerns that need to be addressed. And certainly for these properties, we do then issue any correction orders that are required for enforcement of our property maintenance codes. And been meeting with the code enforcement staff just to discuss this vacant housing registration. I think we've found that 40 residential and fewer than 10 commercial is manageable. We really find that it's a small handful. It's probably 2 or 3 that we have difficulty in identifying who to contact. So for the other 40, we're able to contact the owners. There's really 2 or 3 properties that we just cannot find out who the responsible party is. It seems odd, but oftentimes the mailing address may be the property itself, but the letters essentially get returned. So the bit of the catch-22 with a vacant house registry or vacant property registry is that if we have difficulty contacting them about maintenance and code violations, we expect that we would have similar difficulties in contacting them to letting them know they need to register on our and provide us with their contact information. So your staff report outlines this wasn't necessarily intended as a either or, but we just wanted to outline a couple options for the council to consider. The first is we would need to do this by ordinance, is to establish a requirement that any vacant property in Maplewood register with the city, and so we would need to draft an ordinance to do that. We've outlined in the report some of the pros and some of the cons of doing that. The pros is it would provide just a formal process for us to track the vacant properties in the community, and then would allow us to charge a fee. So recognizing that these provide a higher demand on our code enforcement services, it would allow us to charge a fee to cover our increased costs in code enforcement services for these properties. Some of the drawbacks, it does require time and resources just to administer the requirement. And then secondly, because it would be a blanket requirement against all vacant properties, it's difficult to target the fees to those that are actually placing that higher demand. So there are some vacant properties that are being maintained, probably the ones that we're not even aware of, but certainly there are vacant properties that are being maintained, so we aren't able to target that fee as easily. And then thirdly, as I mentioned, for a very small few, it may be difficult to get actual compliance with even registering the property. So one of the things we have been talking about at the staff level is maybe some things we should look at around abatement, and this would provide maybe a increased use of a tool that the city is already using. So in our ordinance today, we currently have a process for abatement that allows, upon, call it 2 strikes and you're out. But after a certain period of time of non-compliance, it does allow the city to go in and abate the nuisance. So take corrective action to correct the issue, and then charge those costs back to the property owner. We do use it, as I mentioned. We are mainly today using Public Works for this, and that's usually, and the 2 things that they're usually doing are mowing of grass, and then secondly, securing or boarding up unsecured properties. As I mentioned, I think as we've talked about at the staff level, I think there's some things that we could, 3 things that we could look at to maybe make this an even more effective tool and to lean into this abatement process. And the 3 things are, first, we could review our administrative fees. So, and maybe we don't believe this has been done recently, but we just go through the fee schedule and review what the fees are for both, not only the service fee, so what's the passing through of the cost to actually conduct the service, but the administrative fee for administering the abatement process. And that's essentially the fee collection for service. The second is to review our abatement ordinance, and update it as needed. I don't think there's comprehensive updates that are required, but it probably is worthwhile to go in and just make sure that it's properly written to give us the tools that we need to be able to effectively do abatement. And then third, this is maybe one of the bigger changes, is to actually issue an RFP to private contractors to provide abatement services. We've identified 3 things: lawn mowing, removal of junk or debris, and the securing of vacant properties that currently Public Works does assist with that, but we do have the ability to potentially hire private contractors, again, pass those costs along to the property owner, assess them to the taxes if they do not pay them, and then also charge the administrative fee for administering the enforcement activities. So the pros and cons, I think, of this approach are pretty well outlined in your report. Gives us it's actually around compliance. This is not just a tool around registering information. It's actually these are tools around trying to gain compliance, which is the ultimate goal of our code enforcement activities. It would apply to all property maintenance and code violations, so not just vacant properties. And in fact, is probably it's not surprising, the majority of our code enforcement activities and issues do revolve around actual occupied properties. And these are tools that we could utilize on those. Third, the fees would target those properties that are putting the higher demand on our services. And lastly, it does provide a greater disincentive for violating property maintenance requirements, because it will ultimately be cheaper and easier for the property owner to do the work themselves than it will be to have the city paying to have that service done for them. A couple drawbacks: it doesn't provide the information necessarily that's requested in the registry, and it still would require some time just to administer the contracted services. So Mayor and Council, as I stated at the beginning, this is an update on where we're at, provide the information to you. We're happy to seek any direction you would like, but if there's general consensus around this abatement process, we could certainly continue our work around those 3 items I outlined. So with that, Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate that. It certainly helps to see kind of what's happening out there, and what this landscape looks like. I believe I'm the one who brought this forward, if I'm not mistaken. I know I get calls from residents and from businesses about, some unsightly properties. And, in looking at this, I can tell you, I don't want to create any more work for staff. That isn't the objective at all. The objective really, in my mind, is abatement. And it sounds to me like we already have the ability to do that. I don't want to create more government and more, requiring people to register their properties. I think in looking at this and reviewing it all, I just think that we'd be chasing down things when really what I envision is, let's get this taken care of so that we don't have these unsightly properties. And I like the idea of, the three elements that you talked about: reviewing the administrative fees, reviewing our abatement ordinance to make sure that we really can address these unsightly properties, and then looking at an RFP so that when we do identify a vacant property, that we have a contractor who could go out and take care of that. Because it can be very frustrating. And if we have all of that in place, I think we get where we want to be, which is to fix the problem. I don't want to create just more government or more work for any of our staff in terms of hunting down some kind of a registry. So that would be my thoughts on it. Council members, your thoughts, Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, I think the registration is a bit of a solution screaming for a problem. I just don't think it's probably worthwhile. And I think the tools of abatement make sense. I think beefing that up generally makes sense. And I would say if we do look at contracting that, I think if we could prioritize Maplewood businesses in that front. I know there's, LCS Lawn Services here. There's others. I think that'd be nice for us to try to do if we did that.
Great idea. I like that. Councilmember Knudsen. Councilmember Knudsen. Councilmember Juniman.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted for once. Yes, I agree. I don't think we should create something that doesn't need to be created. But I do think the three steps that Mr. Thompson outlined make total sense. And while I often think we should be more proactive and not rely on our citizens, I also think that there's a certain thing to be said for investment in your neighborhood. So if there's a property in your neighborhood that's a problem, you need to report it to us so the city can help a neighborhood take care of it. So I know people don't like to have to do that, but I think to me, that's the cost of living in a neighborhood. You help keep it where it is. And if everybody else is taking care of their properties, if you point out a problem property to our staff, they can help make sure that property doesn't drag down the rest of the neighborhood. So I think the abatement techniques that he was talking about are definitely a good idea. I do think that the reason you're seeing it in a few suburban cities, though, that they actually have a registration is there's been a fair amount of this, and who knows after this COVID thing if that won't send the numbers up everywhere and it may need to be revisited. But for the moment, I do think we have the tools if we just beef them up and make sure they're up to snuff.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Councilmember Knudsen.
Yes, thank you. I think this is really important for everyone in Maplewood. That make sure that all the properties are, are up to what they should be in code and everything else. So I like the abatement process. I think we should be, fairly aggressive about it. And I like the idea of a Maplewood contractor. Good idea, Councilmember Smith. So I think we're on the right track. And
Okay. Mr. Thompson, does that give you enough direction?
Mayor and Council, it does. We'll continue on the abatement and the three things we talked about, and if anything needs to be brought back to the council for approval, we'll bring those items back and certainly provide updates as we go along.
Thank you very much. We'll appreciate and look forward to those. We have gone through our agenda tonight, And I want to give each council member an opportunity to make any comments, statements that they would like to at the end of our council meeting. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I was just trying to find my mute button there. Just want to say that, I think that we just continue to evolve in this time, and I think it's really great how staff and the council have come together to be thoughtful about where we're spending, be thoughtful about what we're committing to right now, and being ready for whatever comes our way. And I think it's going to serve us well in the long run. Also, big shout out to those involved in the story in the newspaper this week about the dog. I thought that was just a fantastic story, and love to see that kind of stuff in print. So wonderful to see.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Knudsen.
Thank you, Mayor. I particularly enjoyed the story that City Manager Coleman put in the communication this week about the task force on mental health. I helped a lot in the early days looking at community paramedics. It's something that my organization embraces. But what a great idea. I like the whole idea of when people ask me and others ask, what do you think of defunding police? I said, not a chance. What I'd like to do is fund the development of social workers ride-alongs, things like that. And there it comes. So I'm very pleased and proud to be involved in Maplewood. Thank you.
Councilmember Juniman.
What he said. Yes. What they both said. It is amazing to me how well we've been able to mesh together and keep things moving and come up with cool new things, even when we aren't together in the same room. And again, a lot of kudos to everyone that had anything to do with this mental health issue. I just think it's wonderful. And once again, we'll probably be able to be a model for other places, can I say. It is a great thing that we can do these kinds of things and have public safety people that are that embedded in their community that they want every aspect of people's lives to be taken care of. It's a wonderful thing. I think we should be very proud and very grateful.
Thank you, council members. I would agree with all of your comments, and I want to thank staff for all of the hard work that they do to make all of this work together during really some challenging times. So council members, thank you for all your wisdom and your participation tonight. Our thoughts and prayers are with Councilmember Neblett and her family in the loss of her father. And with that, council members, we are adjourned. Good night, everyone.